Module 2, 19th Century Philippines, Lesson 3, Economic Condition. Target: evaluate the economic policies implemented by the Spaniards in the Philippines. Guide questions: what were the economic policies implemented by the Spaniards in the Philippines? What were the benefits gained from these policies? How were these policies abused? Philippine economic development under Spain was generally slow because Spain stressed the religious aspects of colonization and it lacked entrepreneurial merchants. José Rizal observed this economic condition of the 19th century Philippines. Although, as experienced by Rizal, there were significant economic policies implemented by the Spanish government for economic growth, they had drawbacks because of misimplementation and abuses. The Encomienda System. When the Spaniards came, the natives lived on land that all the barangay members cultivate. Pre-Hispanic islanders did not recognize private ownership. By right of conquest, the Spanish crown claimed all the lands and implemented the Encomienda System. In essence, the encomienda was the counterpart of the feudal estates in Europe. Lands in the country were divided into parcels under the supervision of the encomendero. However, this system of landholding is not a land grant. By law, the encomendero was tasked to provide for the material and spiritual needs of the natives and to protect them from enemy attack. In return, the inhabitants had to pay tribute and to help in developing the encomienda. There were three kinds of encomiendas: the royal encomienda, an encomienda owned by the king; the ecclesiastical encomienda, an encomienda managed by religious groups; and the privado encomienda or private encomienda, an encomienda under the king's proteges and men who helped in the conquest and pacification of the land. Its objective was for mutual benefit and for the place to be developed. The encomendero administered the inhabitants, and the inhabitants were to share in the development of their encomienda. Unfortunately, the encomenderos committed abuses. Some of them forced the natives to pay more than what was required. Goods paid by the inhabitants were sold at high prices. Those who could not pay were flogged, tortured, or jailed. Due to abuses, the encomienda system was abolished and was replaced by a system of provincial governments. Tributo. The Spaniards exacted from the natives different forms of taxes payable in money or in kind, equivalent to 8 reales. The tribute was increased to 10 reales in 1589 and to 12 in 1851. One tribute is equivalent to one family. Each unmarried male over 20 years old living with parents had to pay one-half of the tribute. The duty of paying the tribute was until 60 years old. The natives are paying different types of taxes such as follows. Cedula. Male and female 18 years old and above will pay 8 reales every year for the cedula. Sanctorium. Tax for the church amounting to 3 reales. Donativo de Zamboanga, 1/2 real to finance the war in Mindanao against the Muslims. The tribute was the primary source of fund of the colonial government. It was used to finance the building of churches, schools, and other infrastructures. It paid also for the government expenses. There were also inhabitants exempted from paying the tribute, those above 60 years old, paupers, and crippled. In times of disasters, such as plague, failure of crops, and other natural disasters, the paying of tax was wholly or partially suspended. In spite of the numerous taxes imposed, the colonial government incurred deficits in the treasury. This was due to inefficient use of funds. Corruption of many colonial officials was common out of fear of instability of their term of office. These malpractices led to the promulgation of a reform decree in 1884, intended to improve the taxation system in the Philippines. The tribute was abolished and was changed to personal cedula tax. It was imposed on every male and female residents of the Philippines who were 18 years or older. All residents, natives, Spaniards, and foreigners required to pay an amount ranging from 50 centavos to 37 pesos and 50 centavos depending on the income of the taxpayer. Polo Y Servicio. Polo Y Servicio, or forced labor, is a Spanish policy that drafted either Indios or Chinese male to oblige them to render service to community projects like construction and repair of infrastructure or cutting logs in forests for 40 days. All able-bodied males from 16 to 60 years old, except chieftains and their elder sons, were required to render labor for the various projects in the colony. This was instituted in 1580 and reduced to 15 days per year in 1884. There were laws that regulated Polo y Servicio. For instance, the polista, the person who renders forced labor, will be paid a daily wage of 1/4 real plus rice. Moreover, the polista was not supposed to be brought to distant place nor required to work during planting and harvesting seasons. The Polo y Servicio was a source of income because polistas had a daily wage and rice. Infrastructure were built and maintained. Despite restrictions, Polo resulted to the disastrous consequences. It resulted to the ruining of communities, the men left behind. The promised wage was not given exactly as promised, that led to starvation or even death to some polistas and their families. Those who can afford can be excused by paying the bandala, which became source of corruption. Galleon Trade. The Galleon Trade was a government-owned business. This was an annual trade between Manila, Philippines, and Acapulco, Mexico. Goods from China, Japan, Thailand, the Moluccas, and other neighboring countries were shipped in Manila to be sold in Mexico. On the return trip, the galleon would carry European goods for the Asian traders. To engage in the galleon trade, one must have a ticket called boleta. Boletas were only issued to the Governor-General, clergy, government officials, widows, and children of Spanish officials. The galleon trade triggered intercultural exchange between the Philippines and Mexico. Mexican influences can be seen in the images of the Virgin of Antipolo, the Black Nazarene of Quiapo, Moriones, and Moro. The languages of Mexico and Philippines were enriched. New plants and animals were introduced. The government revenue increased considerably because of the income from this trade. The easy and eminent profit from the trade led to the neglect of the native extractive industries, particularly agriculture. Planting and harvesting were suspended because the Indios were forced to build galleon in far-off shipyards. The Philippines has a strategic location, but the monopolistic and exclusive character of the trade isolated the archipelago. Only Spanish ships could come to the Philippines, which was a short-sighted policy that failed to realize the chance of the Philippines as a center of trade. Philippines did not benefit the country because in reality, the galleon trade was between other Asian countries and Mexico. The Philippines serves only as a shipping ground of Asian goods. Most of all, only few benefited from the trade. Governor Basco's economic policies. Governor Jose Basco y Vargas succeeded Anda as governor in 1778. His administration stood out because it focused more on the economic improvement of the country. It was his policy to make the Philippines self-sufficient so that it would no longer depend on financial assistance. The Economic Society of the Friends of the Country. On May 6, 1781, Basco organized the Sociedad Económico de Amigos del País, or better known as the Economic Society of the Friends of the Country. He invited knowledgeable people in economics, agriculture, industry, and finance to help him realize his economic programs for the country. The Economic Society pushed several projects and programs to improve the economic situation of the Philippines. It encouraged the improvement of agriculture by giving off incentives, by circulating pamphlets on improved agricultural methods, and buying off imported heavy machines for agriculture. It promoted profitable education, vocational or technical training. Before the objectives of the society were fully realized, the society ended. It ceased to operate after Governor Basco's term. The tobacco monopoly. On March 1, 1782, as a measure to increase the government revenues, Governor Basco established the tobacco monopoly. Certain areas such as Cagayan Valley, Ilocos provinces, Nueva Ecija, and Marinduque were ordered to plant tobacco. Only the government was allowed to buy the tobacco leaves, which were brought to Manila to be made into cigars and cigarettes. The tobacco industry was so successful that for the first time, the Philippines ceased being an economic drag in the royal treasury. A year after its implementation, the government had a surplus of 1,320,656 pesos after overdue amounts had been paid. Aside from the financial benefit, the Philippines became the largest tobacco producing country in Asia. It provided jobs for the Filipinos in cigar and cigarette factories. It triggered internal trade. Regions where the best land reserved for tobacco became markets for products grown elsewhere, like rice, which soon began to be needed in commercial quantities. Soon after the tobacco monopoly's success, abuses occurred. Tobacco growers were paid through promissory notes and at very low rates. Abusive inspectors, in the pretense of looking for hidden tobacco leaves, forcibly entered the house of farmers and took away anything of value. In order to recover their losses, farmers entered into smuggling and contraband selling of tobacco. The abuses and corrupt practices committed by the officials led to the abolition of the monopoly in 1882 by Governor General Primo de Rivera. The Royal Company of the Philippines. During the height of European colonial expansion, royal companies were established by the competing world powers. Among these were the East India Company, England, the Dutch East India Company, Holland, and the French East India Company, France. These companies make great profits, thus Spain decided to establish its own. By the Royal Decree of March 10, 1785, Royal Company of the Philippines was established. The primary objective of the company was to establish direct contact with the resources of Oriental goods from China and India and to develop the country's natural resources. To ensure the success of the company, the King of Spain granted special privileges such as exclusive control of the trade between the Philippines and Spain. Philippine goods entering Spain were tax-free and direct trade with Asian countries. The Royal Company of the Philippines opened the Philippines to world trade. It also contributed funds for the further development of agriculture, especially the production of sugar, indigo, and spices. Under its charter, the company was required to set aside 4% of its profits for agricultural development. Royal Company failed its mission due to mismanagement, non-cooperation of Manila traders, and the strong opposition of the Dutch and British. Reference: Ramirez, nephew Fidel Ignacio, Journey 1, Philippine History, Cliffs Publishing, 2012.